All right, everyone. How are you doing? It is 1 p.m. in Kitsap County. I'm so glad that you can join me today. Matter of fact, I'm happy to join you because I haven't been here during this hour and probably like the last 3 weeks. It's been a busy time, but I'm here. I am here. So I'm very excited. We have a great show in store for you. So without any ado, let me go ahead and bring on my esteemed co-host of the show, Mark Boatwright Frost.
Hey,
How are you doing there?
I'm doing really well today. Sun is out. I've gotten a lot of work done. I'm ready for today's discussion. I'm feeling good.
All right. I love it. I love it. I love it. Let me just go ahead and make sure that we're 5 by 5. All right. We're looking good, feeling good. And Mark is not alone today. Today, oh wait, we already got someone in the chat. All right. Hey, how you doing there, Rob? Thank you for joining us today. Today we have a special guest for you. You may have seen him before if you were coming out and watching the workshops or participating in the workshops. What it's been a year and a half ago now, at
Yep,
least.
pretty much.
But I want to bring to the show Tom Martin, who is the Black Ring Spirits owner out there in Port Orchard and an anthropologist. So let's go ahead and give him the horn and go ahead and give him an applause and bring him on forward.
Wow.
How are you doing?
Thank you. Hey, there's Terry. Hi, Terry.
Hey. So you got a case of the clap from us.
Thanks.
And the show is off and running.
Yes, it is.
So we are going to talk about some interesting stuff, but I want to start off with some statistics. So I'm going to pull up a sheet so I can talk to you a little bit about it. And I'm going to start off with the fact that I was wrong about something, not something that I'd said, but something that I believed.
Right.
A few years ago, I saw a study about world religions. And for those of you who don't know, in college, I studied religious studies. So I was into history, into the cultural aspects of it, into all of the reasons and thoughts behind and practices of religions. So I came to the belief of something I had read that Buddhism was the largest religion on the planet, and in fact, it is not by rather a long shot. And I am willing to admit I'm wrong when I'm wrong, and it is, in fact, Christianity is the number one religion in the world. In the United States, it represents somewhere around 63% of the country, or about 210 million. And that sounds like, a hell of an argument for the people who say we're a Christian country, despite the, constitutional amendment saying that we have a separation of church and state. But I'd like to point out a couple of other facts that go with this, because that's a raw number and it's a very powerful raw number. But as I was doing the research about all of the numbers and how they broke out, including finding things that I really didn't know about the various branches of Christianity, and this will all become germane in a few moments. But one of the maps that I saw shows the predominant religion in each state in the United States. And I had no idea that, Catholicism was so well represented across the United States. About 2/3 of the United States, the predominant religion in that state is Catholicism. There's only one state that is predominantly Methodist, and two states, you can probably guess which ones they are, that are Lutheran, the very German North and South Dakota. And of course, the Utah is the Latter-day Saints. But Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana have no predominant religion.
Yeah.
We seem to be a blend.
You have a link for that? I'd love to pop that up for folks to see. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's actually a wiki, so there's a lot of stuff here, but I will happily send you the link to it.
Yeah, sure.
pop it in private chat. So, boom. Okay. So as I was going through this, it was the interesting part was at the very end of it, which is attendance. And for all of those numbers, only one state exceeds 51% attendance on a weekly basis to their religion of choice, and that's Utah. Washington State is 24%, Vermont 17%. So what does that say about those numbers? Now, the other thing that I found very interesting is that the territories, American Samoa, Guam, Northern Mariana Islands, Puerto Rico, and Virgin Islands, are all over 80 and up into 90% attendance. Yeah. I found that very interesting.
Yeah, this is fascinating.
So, and I know that people argue it's a wiki, so who knows if it's real or not, but it was quoting Pew, which is a very good source for information. They do reasonably good research. So, and that's the demographics by state. The blue is Catholicism. And actually, I was a little surprised that California is as deep into it as it is, having come from there. I would have guessed it was more of the gray that we are.
I haven't lived in California in a long time.
Yeah. So this is interesting. Now, the reason I brought this up is because the topic is tools. And the first tool I wanted to bring up is to shock everybody into thinking a little bit. And this is not a judgment in any way, shape, or form on any religion, but we frame a lot of stuff in our language around good and evil. When we talk about corporations and capitalism, when we talk about billionaires, we think of, I have heard the term many, many times, and I actually don't use this term, but they are referred to as evil.
Mm-hmm.
And, people who like Bernie Sanders is considered good. And I find those terms difficult when you're thinking about how to frame solutions. What is good and evil? They're fixed points. What does that get you in the way of being able to solve things? You put something in such a fixed place. Where do you go from there?
Well, I mean, first you have to define before you do it, you have to define what good and evil are in the terms of that culture before you go anywhere else.
So U.S. culture. I mean, that's what we're hearing. People saying that's evil. They're evil. What does that mean? I mean, really, does it mean that you're hurting and you don't like what they're doing? How does that fixed point help you move forward into solving the problem?
But well, you can't solve the problem until we define exactly what we mean by good and what we mean by evil.
And that's kind of my point, is that they're very vague terms.
Well,
and they mean a lot of things to a lot of people.
They're not vague in terms of a culture. So if my background in anthropology, I studied the ancient Mayans.
Mm-hmm.
And their culture allowed for slavery. Their
Mm-hmm.
culture allowed for human sacrifice. Their culture allowed for a caste system that was brutal. If you were at the top, you were great. If you're at the bottom, you lived a short life. But it wasn't evil to the people that existed within it. I mean, we look at it as despicable and deplorable, but at the time, it was not evil.
Yeah, but we have problems with context in our culture.
Oh, without a doubt. That's a huge part of what we're fighting with right now.
Yeah.
Everything is framed in terms of good and evil, which, okay, that's a social tool we can work with. But if you don't like something and you tag it, you identify it, you frame it as evil, then, who defines that? Especially in America, because the whole idea of America was we're supposed to be a melting pot, right? We're supposed to put all these different cultures and ideas together and then somehow live harmoniously, which is
a challenge. So, I came up through the 70s and 80s, and the comic book culture was part of my background. So yes, children of today, you're not the only ones who read a lot of comic books. And there was one that was one of my favorites I always found amusing called Evangeline. Are you familiar with it?
I don't know.
It's kind of like Catholics in space. They've now become they have giant cathedrals floating through space and stuff. And
Oh,
Evangeline, if I remember correctly, and it's been a while, is a nun who's a warrior nun. And so when you see evil, Evangeline shows up with like giant guns and swords and takes the evil apart. And I said, well, that's a nice thought, but how realistic is that to deal with somebody for some reason is termed as evil? Again,
well,
it's about context.
but it is in that story that you're talking about. There is context because it's based around the Catholic Church, and there's a very
Right.
clear definition of what good and evil are in that culture.
Which has been flexible over the centuries.
Oh, without doubt, yeah, because uh,
Crusades.
yeah, a social structures only work. Social structures only work when you don't have a tyrant involved in the top tier of what leads things. I mean, there's so many variables involved that good and evil will never have a concrete definition.
Right. And I think that is, Marwan, I'm seeing your ear.
I'm here.
I see his big smile.
Okay. Smile in an ear. Okay. But I think that's kind of my point. If you're trying to solve a problem, and we have a lot of cultural problems, the terms good and evil I have so many potential
Pitfalls.
pitfalls and meanings, that they're not really useful when solving a large problem. And I'd like to focus on corporations for a moment, because corporate greed has been a huge calling out of evil over the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I don't see how evil is a solution. I see that evil is a term that you use for them, saying that their actions are bad, but I would rather say their actions are hurting people. But evil's a little too amorphous for me. It's like I'd
Well,
like to know how they're hurting people, why they're hurting people. And I'd also like to point out that it isn't some person in charge of the corporation that's hurting people, it's the process of the corporation itself.
I don't necessarily think evil's the right way to brand a corporation.
Exactly.
I mean, the idea behind a corporation is to build a business by providing a good or service, and if the greater community finds value in that good or service, then that corporation is going to be successful, and they're going to make money, and they're going to grow.
That's a
What's
good definition of business.
Yeah,
But I think
what's
I think when you become a publicly traded corporation, it becomes something other than that. And I'm not saying that become something other than that is good or evil. I'm just
I
saying that it becomes other than business practices. Like
eh,
you're a business person providing a service, and your service is good, so you should be successful.
well, I try to be, but I mean, when we go from being let's pretend that I just become wildly successful and we decide to be publicly traded,
Mhm.
that doesn't change the overall mission of the business. So the business becomes a corporation with lots of people that have a vested interest in it now. And that how's that suddenly become evil? Now it's a group of people that are
I don't
trying
think
to
it
move
is.
forward with a good or
Yeah.
service in the same mission.
Yeah, I don't think it is evil, but I think evil is a bad term to coin it with. On the other hand, what you're describing is in fact the ideal of corporate America. It's what I learned in economics. It's the ideal of what it is. I think in practice these days, a lot of publicly traded corporations do not provide the best service because their focus is on shareholder profit, not on providing service to their customers.
Right. Well, the problem we run into with anything nowadays is as it gets bigger, it gains momentum. It gets more facets to it, I guess, and it gets more human input. And it's perfectly normal. It's human nature to consider yourself first. That's a survival
Mhm.
instinct. and so of course you want to have more profit and more things for yourself as an individual, and some people can't look past that.
So, what do you think about the term unregulated capitalism?
I don't think there's any such thing as unregulated.
You don't think that what we're living in now is an unregulated capitalistic system?
Oh, no, 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 no. I can show you three ring binder after three ring binder of regulations I have to follow. So we are not in unregulated capitalism right now. And I don't think there's any such thing as unregulated capitalism, because if a company or a corporation comes forward with a good or service, and that good or service doesn't serve any value to the larger the masses, the free market's going to regulate it. It's going to go away. So the idea of unregulated capitalism is, it's kind of silly. The free market will regulate it.
That's a good theory, and it should be in practice. However, there are a lot of unregulated sectors. I mean, and I would argue that they are regulated within silos. But if you
What?
look at, I think that the regulations happen in silos. Like,
Okay.
in areas like you're regulated because you're food and alcohol, and there's a
Mhm.
lot of regulations. I think that there are EPA regulations, sort of, for a lot of manufacturing, though we don't do much manufacturing in this country, which is why
National.
we don't. That's why we don't do manufacturing in this country, is because a lot of the EPA regulations make it costly to do manufacturing. So when we go to, but the stock market and the too big to fail, does that ring of regulation, or does that ring of, like, runaway capitalism without any of the breaks? I mean, when you look at it, a healthy economy, and I think you and I will agree on this, looks like a pyramid,
Hmm.
and I frequently called it a pyramid scheme. You have
Okay.
money flowing throughout the base is ever expanding on the pyramid, and that is a healthy economy. There is money throughout all of the system, and the people at the top, the money goes up to the top, but it's spread throughout the entire economy, throughout all of the people in the economy who are working.
It
And
should,
that's
yeah.
not what we have now. What we have is an upside down pyramid where the vast majority of the money goes to the people at the top, and people are getting poorer and poorer and poorer within the base of the
Yeah.
pyramid.
The base of that pyramid's getting narrower and narrower and narrower.
Yeah, and so it becomes a point where it's going to collapse because it can't sustain itself. And that's what I'm wondering about. That's what I'm talking about regulation, is people aren't looking at it for the safety of the entire economy. And I can only think that people don't really understand what's happening, or they just don't have the will to address it.
I think the system's become so complex that most people don't understand it, because they've got too many other things to do. As they get edged out of the base of that pyramid, where they've got a little something to take care of themselves and their families,
To nothing.
they're getting busier and busier trying to find ways to well, make it.
So what I'm thinking is, going back to the good and evil, I don't think good and evil as a concept or words help solve that problem.
No, not at all. It divides us. I mean, that's part of where we are right now.
And bingo, thank you very much. You just made my point.
It's funny. I wrote a little something I put on my Facebook page just a night or two ago. I've kind of withdrawn from social media for quite a while because it's become so toxic and hateful, and that's not helping anything. So I decided to get a little bit more active and have conversations and thought experiments and stuff on my Facebook profile. And I sat down and wrote something to it almost speaks to this exactly, this division, anyways. And I don't know if people know how to digest it.
Predominantly, it is a lot of people won't. A lot of people won't even look at it because it's like more than 3 seconds long and not have kittens or cats. And I'm sorry, people, for
Yeah, no, you're
insulting
right.
you, But
you're right.
the attention span on on social media is very narrow.
Yeah, I seriously considered putting a bikini model right in front of the paragraph so people would actually click on it and read it.
Well, that's one way to do it. On the other
I
hand, I
mean,
will say that whenever I put a thoughtful post up that I spend time actually writing it out,
mm-hmm.
they are the most read posts that I have on either the Kids Up Resiliency Project page or my page. So there are people out there who will read it and are looking for that, but there aren't going to be the majority. I have almost 2,000 people following me on my personal Facebook page, and if I have 10 people regularly follow my stuff, it's a miracle.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have that vast an audience. I think I'm close to a 1,000 people. And that's been by design. I don't want
Yeah.
lists and lists and lists of people that I don't actually know. I want to have done some sort of interaction with everyone on my Facebook page in some way, shape, or form.
And I try and do the same thing. And actually,
Yeah,
it's amazing how many of those people I actually know.
yeah. Well, you get in the car and get around a lot more than I do. I'm kind of shackled to a ball and chain here. This.
Or to a boiler, I should say.
Yeah. Well, still a boiler, a mash tun, a bottling machine, something.
Yeah. So going back to the point of this, I was using good and evil as an example, and you actually made my point for me that it is actually ends up being more divisive than it is cooperative and or collaborative. And if you look at the tools that we use to change the world, our cultural tools, you'll find that the vast majority of them also create divisiveness and push you away from collaboration.
Yeah.
And cooperation.
It's an extreme example, but an ordinary day to the spider is complete chaos to the fly.
Right.
And does that make the spider evil?
No. Yeah, no. It just makes the spider a spider.
Yeah.
There's the old adage about the scorpion getting a ride across the river, and he ends up stinging. I think it was a frog, but I'm not sure.
Right. Yeah, and it's because it's nature.
It is by nature.
Yeah.
So that doesn't determine good or evil. So what we have to determine, as the parable goes,
Mark.
Huh?
I got to push back on that one. I don't think that one fits, right? Because that story goes.
I'm going to tie it in right now.
Well, hold on. Let me just jump in there. I've been pretty silent the whole time. The story goes, hey, I'll give you a ride and I'm not going to sting you, right? So it would be one thing if it was about the nature, but when there's the lying and the deceit that comes in it, that's a whole nother piece of it. I just want to interject that. Go ahead.
Yeah, and actually that can tie right into what we're talking about. A lot of the problems, there's lying and deceit because that's one of our cultural norms. We've been programmed to lie more often than we are to tell the truth. It's a choice that we work on, to be honest. And, that's kind of what we have to work with. But one of the things I'm going to say, if you want to solve a problem, you have to understand its nature. Its real nature. You have to study it, and you have to look at it, and you have to understand what is the likely outcome based on what it is. And so the tools we've been given work on the general. I mean, let's talk about protesting for a moment. When you have 1 million people protesting, you get the attention of the powers that be, whoever they are, the corporations, the business, the government, whatever. But does it actually change anything?
Only on the surface.
Yeah. So let's talk about the movement, the peace movement in the 60s, which became way more than just the peace movement. So first of all, there was a peace movement. There's protests against Vietnam, get us out of Vietnam, peace and cooperation and working together and love, not war. All of these things were part of it. Within 7 or 8 years, none of that existed anymore. The movement became a pair of bell-bottom jeans and a shoulder-length haircut. And people going around, and then suddenly we had disco music and the thought of the war and everything else. Now, the war was ended because during that time, but was it because of the protests or because of the costs?
have come to the conclusion that we have.
Hey, I'm on a video thing. Okay. Um, is probably a bit of both.
That's what I agree.
You know, nothing's black and white, and I think that it also gets down to the crux of the problem right now. We go back to the idea of good and evil, us and them, me versus you. It's nothing's binary like that. Not from a cultural standpoint. So what got us out of Vietnam? Everything from social pressure to extreme expense to I think eventually valuing life more than the idea of the spread of communism.
And the fact we couldn't win.
Well, I mean, there's that. Yeah, there was a population that was fighting to save their home and their culture and everything else from an invasive idea.
So,
but that culture had its own problems too. So it's
and those of us without problems, raise your hand. I mean, the problems are everywhere. It's inherent within our culture as well. But my point of the 60s in Vietnam is it wasn't necessarily the protests that got us out of it. And the protest movement was essentially co-opted and re-messaged really slickly for the time in 7 years. Occupy Wall Street. No one talks about much anymore. They're a group on Facebook somewhere, and it got co-opted and changed. And a lot of the powerful movements, the civil rights movement, once Martin Luther King had been assassinated, it got co-opted over a period of time because there was no charismatic leader to take the role and lead forward.
Okay.
So
yeah.
That's the tool of culture to stop change. They co-opt it.
But that was the catalyst for change. So it did work. The problem is that it lost momentum and other interests came in and changed that.
Yes.
So I agree with Tom on that it's both, right?
Yeah.
That those things that you reflected on, that worked. That pushed the needle. That changed the minds of people and caused behavioral change and structural change. It's just over, like you said, a period of time. Then other folks and other interests used it to their advantage.
So instead of building a highway to a human future as the movement would have driven, it became a speed bump that changed a situation in the most minimal way possible, and then back to business as usual.
What I think you're talking about, though, is the obstacle of human nature.
Is it?
No matter how far removed we get from being hunter gatherers that are worried about a saber-toothed tiger eating us on the savannah, we're thousands and thousands of years removed from that, but those instincts are still up here. So we have to fight that human nature of more for me, give me, give me, give me. I have to survive, and so the idea that we can all come together and work cooperatively, it never stays on track. It evolves because one of those charismatic people you were talking about, like Martin Luther King or whomever, they're gone, they're deceased, they've whatever removed. There's not another person to keep their eye on that same goal. So the people who do come in to take place change. They change course of the ship. So I wasn't alive during Martin Luther King. I can't speak to it. The Vietnam protests, I was a toddler. Let's fast forward to something closer to today.
Occupy Wall Street?
No, even that's a little bit old. Let's go to the BLM movement.
Okay.
Right. So, I mean, Black Lives Matter, that was huge. And when it first started, it was such it was a good direction for certain aspects of society, when we look at systemic injustice and such, because it's there, whether people like to admit it or not. It's there. Quick example. Trying to think of some systemic thing. Prohibition of cannabis. That was aimed at God. When did the cannabis prohibition start?
The 50s, I think.
Yeah, I believe the 50s and 60s, and
Yeah.
cannabis was popular in the jazz clubs and the blues clubs, and anything that wasn't white
Right.
bread America.
When you start talking about that, I immediately flash on the movie Reefer Madness.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, that right there it's an example of something that was systemic. It was a very focused attack.
Hmm.
Um, so when Black Lives Matter, came up to fight things like that, it had a great course. But then look at the Chop Chaz zone in, what was that, 2020, 2021? That didn't do anyone any good. It was destruction of businesses and property and vandalism, all in the name of protest, but that wasn't a real protest.
And that happens a lot. And even in with the Occupy Wall Street, same thing happened. There were people immediately starting to protest or were focused on breaking things up. I would point out that the minute you get a movement like that, there's almost an immediate counter messaging that starts happening,
Oh,
and
definitely.
that goes out to start co-opting the movement and dividing people.
Yeah, that's
Um,
because human nature is resistant to change.
well, yeah, because change usually bites us in the butt.
Yeah.
But I would argue that we did a lot better tribally than we're doing today on our own, being individuals.
Hang on just a second and chat
Sure.
amongst yourselves. How's it going, my friend? Going good.
While
Good.
he's having that conversation, I'll just go
I
ahead and
Okay.
mute him. I make it no secret. I have serious issues with the Black Lives Matter movement, not with what the term was designed to mean. Was all for that, but again, if you look on and look at what's happened, right? There was the bilking, the grift of hundreds, tens of millions of dollars that still hasn't been accounted for. And the fact that, again, on that website in the very beginning, it was about dismantling the Black family, the traditional Black family. So I had huge issues with that. My question would be is we have these catalysts, these world events that happen that cause us to band together and um, go forward in one voice. So how is a movement co-opted? Because that's very interesting, right? That momentum was nationwide. And granted, you had George Floyd, you had COVID, you had a number of things that all had to happen all at the same time for it to catch so much steam. But how do these things get co-opted when there's so many people
I will
for
say
it?
I will tell you, all lives matter. Now, I have the next thing to say about that, because before I go into this is I personally believe all lives matter because I'm a humanist. But that said, Black lives are at incredible risk, and we need to focus our attention there. But the minute I say all lives matter, I become the enemy, and it creates a divisiveness, and there's no conversation after that point. And that alienate the minute somebody said all lives matter as a co-opting message to get people angry and divisive, that negated my ability to have a conversation with people.
Well, that goes back to the the good and evil, the tribalism that is created by good and evil. Um, people on one side that hear, Black Lives Matter, their response could be all lives matter, and that immediately creates that rift. When that I mean, that should be painfully
Oh,
obvious that we as a community should come together, and I think the
and
idea
address
that
this very, very, very deep problem that needs to be addressed.
But we're never going to fix it.
Why not?
It's because it's rooted too deep up here. It's part of,
It's only
you know,
rooted too deep up there because we're programmed to believe it is.
I think it goes deeper than that. I do think it gets into, survival instinct kind of stuff.
Well, it does because we're told it does on almost. And let me go back to talking about the neighborhood thing. Marwan, I showed that to you. You were a little stunned when I showed it to you at the board meeting. I went out. I was writing a thing about neighborhoods and community, and I went out and looked at quotes about neighborhoods. And when I went out and looked at quotes about neighborhoods, there were page after page after page after page of negative quotes about
Hmm.
neighborhoods. There was
Hmm.
one. I think Marwan found one positive quote about neighborhoods. But you go out and look at community and do the same search on community, you have all this glowing but no real touch, feel engagement with community. We have been messaged to believe that our neighbors are people who are against us and we shouldn't be connected to. But we all are searching for this wonderful community, which could be our neighborhood if we thought about it differently.
I think that's the duality of our survival instinct. Um, so we humans as modern humans as we exist now with all this magic, I mean, we're sitting here talking to each other in 3 different places, and that's all so new to the human brain, to the human condition, that evolution hasn't caught up with it yet. We're still stuck in the idea that, this is mine, and the people around me are a part of my tribe, and these are the people that are going to take care of me and keep me safe, and I'm going to help take care of them and keep them safe. um, so that right there, and just instinctively we push everything else away, but we're always looking for a better sense of community because that means more safety.
Right. And so is it not possible to expand that definition to a broader community and make the effort to build the relationships that would create it?
I think it is, but you've got to find the right vocabulary for it.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
You've got to
100% agreement.
yeah, you've got to tickle that spot in the brain that reaches down into the, the innate, the instinctive, the lizard brain, the part of your brain that, you know as I call it in the three, or in anthropological discussion, the 3 F's: feed, fight, and I'm sure you'll figure out the third one. um it
Fun?
Procreate.
Yeah, something like that. uh, but I mean, those are all human instincts, and when I say fight, I don't necessarily mean, like a physical altercation, but conflict is human nature. It's a protect.
But so is cooperation. So why are we so focused on one and not the other?
Because we haven't evolved enough yet, I don't think. There's more in our history, our long ago history. There's more out there that's going to kill us than there is that's going to help us.
And is
So
that still true today?
instinctively, we're looking for the bad because the bad will kill you.
Yeah.
And
And
if
is
we
that still
don't
true
have
today?
true bad, we'll create it.
Yep. And I think that's my point about cultural programming. I think that we're perfectly capable of shifting our behavior toward each other into a behavior relationship. But you're right. You're right. We need a different vocabulary and we need to look at things differently, which is, by the way, what the workshops are built for, to do exactly that. Um,
Let me ask a question, Mark.
sure.
Uh, because earlier you talked about the root, and I'm not seeing the roots. I'm hoping you can help me see that, right? So in the discussion with Black Lives Matter, right, there was this sea change of people that came forward and said, "Hey, Black Lives Matter. We have to, acknowledge that. We need to do something," right? And yes, there was a counter narrative that showed up. And in the very beginning, I wasn't against, BLM or the movement because I didn't have facts and information, right? That
Then there
didn't
were
come,
the opportunists,
that
which
that
is
didn't
which are
come
which became
that
your
didn't come
problem.
that didn't come till later, right? So I
Mhm.
was all on board in the very beginning, first 6 months or so, right? Because I'm not investigating that and caught up with everything that's going. But with the nation, and really that was a global phenomenon, right?
Mhm.
How is it that the counter narrative overcame the movement? So is it that it really wasn't as many people that were really on that side in the first place, and some folks were going along to get along because of the social pressure to, accept it and acknowledge it? And then you had that counter narrative of all lives matter and everything else, and police lives matter, blue lives matter, and it's been co-opted by everything right now. Now it's kind of a joke. But, all clown lives matter, right? And then you see that, and it shifts back to the other
Oh no,
way.
not clowns. Clowns are bad. They're evil.
But
Sorry.
now
Why?
today,
Why are clowns evil?
but who
You know,
talks
it's
about
funny.
BLM now?
Did you
Mark,
not
that
ever
is
see it?
weird. That is weird because I was having that I was prepping for this whole conversation over the past couple of days when you and I had talked first. And this morning I was taking a shower, shaving my head, just doing my morning routine, and I got to thinking about good and evil and clowns. I was like, what makes clowns evil? Seriously, that came to my mind. It's like, what makes clowns evil? And there's only one thing, one bad instance: John Wayne Gacy. That's why
Oh,
clowns are bad.
it's actually movies. Killer
But
Clowns from
why
Outer
do those
Space.
movies? Why do those movies grab hold of clowns?
I don't
Because of
know.
one bad clown.
I
Yeah.
didn't see
Anyway,
John Wayne Gacy. I
he
think
was a serial
there's
killer.
something different. It's the unknown, right? I'm looking for a
Yeah.
human face, and something made up is unknown to me, and that's scary, right? That's why some children are afraid of clowns, but they haven't seen John Wayne Gacy, right? They're terrified.
Yeah. My
Right.
Um,
daughter was
Well,
terrified of Santa Claus.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's because clowns have become, the evil side of clowns have become a part of urban and social legend because of one bad clown. I
Yeah.
mean, we took that
So
one bad clown and we made him the boogeyman in movies and all kinds of stuff. So,
so
but
the
clowns are not inherently evil. Clowns are supposed to bring joy and happiness and laughter, and so yeah, it's so funny you bring up clowns.
and funny you were thinking about it. But to get back to Marwan's question is, if you think of our culture as a computer program running its program, like corporations tend to run their programs and they are very successful at it. Over the last several thousand years, it's gotten very good at counter messaging because it sees the cultural mind, AI, whatever, sees movements like Black Lives Matter as a threat. So the minute it starts perceiving that threat and the threat comes above the radar horizon, they start the messaging. They or it starts the messaging.
Well,
I don't want to give it a face and say them. It starts the messaging and the counter messaging, and people are already programmed to hear that, and it goes into our schooling. It goes into how we have been engaged with throughout our entire lives. We tend to start listening to those messages. Now, is to say that aren't people really there? Are they social pressure? Yes, all of that is in effect. Some people are there because it feels like a good movement, but they're doing it from their armchairs in their living room and watching the news. Some people go to the marches, but the minute that it starts becoming difficult, they drop out and stop. Then there's the whole creating other people, and raising questions about things, and that's what happens. And I don't know. In this next part, I don't know, but I would hazard to guess that if you looked at any movement, you would find the same kind of corruption that turned you off, Marwan, but it was very much more publicized because of the power of the movement. The more powerful the movement, the more you're going to be the more the corruption and the opportunists are going to be highlighted
Right,
well,
but the
because it
information
becomes
come
yeah.
out that that was it was built off of that, right? This wasn't something that came later. Like those folks that organized it, that was what they went in with, right? So it was like, hey, it's there's a lot of folks, and there's quite a few in this town that do the right thing because there's money tied to it, and that's the only reason why they're doing it. And if they
Mhm.
could get money another way or easier, then they wouldn't be doing the quote unquote good thing. Um, and you saw that with Black Lives Matter, right? A bunch of nonprofits sprung up, and there was this opportunity. I've been told, hey, you know what? They're giving Black people money right now, so this is the time that you need to go for it and do this and that. And I feel some kind of way about that, right? both things can be true. Like, hey, there's this issue historically, and this is an opportunity, and folks want to do something different. So you do need to take advantage of, it. But at the same time, right? You were it was good enough for you before, right? And the only reason why you're doing it now is because there's a bag attached to it and monetary gain for you. So, I
Yeah, I
definitely.
hadn't heard that. I hadn't heard about the from the very beginning. I just kind of assumed that there's always opportunists involved in these things. I mean, we've seen it too often, but generally, the bigger the movement, the more quickly that comes into the news, and the news starts promoting it, which helps discredit the movement.
Well, I think one of the other complications, if we go back to your earlier example of the peace protests in the '60s,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that it took 6 or 7 years for that movement to be co-opted, right?
Yeah,
And BLM happened that fast because of social media. It's so much easier for us to communicate now, and in our efforts to stay connected and communicating, we've built tribalism right into our means of communication. You can get on any Facebook page and create a group for underwater basket weaving, or
hey, I have a degree in that. Sorry,
pardon.
that was a joke in college. I said, let's
Oh,
get a degree in underwater basket weaving.
right,
So
right. But I mean, we can go ahead and divide ourselves so easily now with social media. So everyone exists in an echo chamber. So now all the things that you're spouting about the us and them, the good and evil, you say that in an echo chamber, and now you're reinforcing that idea in your own head, and you get more ideas from other people that you're having conversation with, and the tribalism gets deeper, and the rift gets wider. I don't think social media is really helping us.
actually, social media is one of the first things that got co-opted. One of the reasons Facebook is the way it is now is because of Arab Spring. It became such a powerful tool for bringing together what was essentially a revolution that suddenly Facebook became less and less relevant. I can't get people, when I do the workshops, I may get people saying they're going to go from Facebook, but no one ever shows up. I should put up a flyer in a coffee shop and or the library, and people show up for the events.
Mm-hmm.
So people don't pay any attention to Facebook. To them, it's a whole bunch of people saying random bullshit.
Yeah. Oh, hey.
Did I just say a bad word on the air?
You did.
Oh.
So social media, and Facebook's a great example, just because for me, I know it best. So I know that you can put together groups and exist within those groups.
You're a member. You're a member of one of my groups.
I'm a member of lots of groups, and none of them have any diversity of ideas.
I disagree. I think Resiliency Rocks has a lot of diversity of ideas. It's just nobody pays any attention to them.
The focus of that group is to present diversity, which we have to put that one kind of off to the side. But if I'm part of a Facebook group that is about I don't know, woodworking,
I'll agree with you, and I'll give you a really good example. There is a local social justice group, and I'm about to piss somebody off that is a mutual friend of Marwan and myself.
Okay.
And if you try and post on their page, they require you to put a very specific intro as to why it relates specifically to people of color.
Okay.
And that's the only way they'll accept you. And I have had more than actually about 80% of my stuff bounced, because even though within the body of it, it talks specifically about social justice and people of color, they reject it because I didn't spend 10 minutes putting together a intro as to why it was relevant to them.
But what's interesting about this conversation is now, based on the last 50 minutes, I would be inclined to agree with their methodology in that, because of the co-opting, right?
Yeah.
So what they're trying to do is stave off, the issue, right? And so what they're trying to do is stave off the issue, right? And so what they're trying to do is stave off the issue, right? And so what they're trying to do is stave off the issue, right? And so what they're trying to do is stave off the issue, right? And so what they're trying to do is stave off the issue, right? And so what they're trying to do is stave off the issue, right? And so what they're trying to do is stave off the issue, right? And so what they're trying to do is stave off the issue, right? And so what they're trying to do is stave off the issue, right? And so what they're trying to do is stave off the issue, right? And so what they're trying to do is stave off the issue, right? And so what they're trying to do is stave off the issue, right? And so what they're trying to do is stave off the issue, right? And so what they're trying to do is stave off the issue, right? And so what they're trying to do is stave o folks coming in with the Trojan horse of saying, hey, hey, this is good stuff and it's in there, and it's not, the purpose of the site. So based on this conversation, I've now been, turned to the dark side, if you will, if that is the dark side.
Well,
But
yeah.
well,
Well, the problem though is that now there's missed opportunities. And you have to be able to view opportunity in its I guess intended form.
But you're always going to miss opportunities, right? You have to guard against it. We can look at civil rights or BLM or Occupy Wall Street or the CHOP or any of the other things that folks have fought for and have been co-opted, and then we find ourselves here. So now they're saying, you know what? We're not going to allow this to be co-opted the way these other things were. So yes, the least you can do is tell us how this relates.
The flip side of that, Marwan, is that I could write a really beautiful intro and have a complete pack of bullshit attached to it.
Yeah,
the price for change, right? It's the price for business. Just because I start a business doesn't mean that it should be successful.
No, and it's the point is that there has to be a diversity of ideas. And that's one of the reasons that Resiliency Rock exists. I mean, I have 3 people that post articles that they write to it, and I've only ever had to remove 2 of them because they went to the doomsday stuff, and I went, time out. We don't do that. We don't talk politics on this page, and we don't talk huh?
Is that true diversity then? Because you're saying is, hey, it's diversity because I say that this is the type of diversity that it needs to be, and it's like, no.
Well, there's some kind of moderation that has to happen, and when you go to, nuclear war is imminent, I have to call. Well, wait a minute here, and go back and say, well, let's talk about diversity, and let's talk about the need of change. Like we can talk about all kinds of problems. But when you start going to the world's going to end because of a nuclear bomb, I have to call it.
So this is akin to me of going up to a Spanish speaker and saying, hey, I'd love to talk to you, but you need to talk English to me, right? So you've gone to their webpage and they speak Spanish. So if you want to engage with me here on my webpage,
Spanish, hadn't I?
I need you to speak Spanish, right? But if I come to your webpage and you speak English, then I'm going to need to try to speak English, right?
But you also have to be relevant. And I respect
what's relevant. You define what's relevant?
The person who owns the page. And I leave it open for a lot of stuff. But relevant to me is it has to be real. It has to be well researched. It has to have substantial information.
Well, I mean, there are some things we don't know a lot about, but we still have to recognize the idea of, the end of it all, social collapse. I mean, that it's a possibility. And if we can discuss it a little bit and recognize where it might come from, then maybe we can prevent it. So I wouldn't say, nix all the doomsday conversations. If we say, oh, Russia's going to bomb us all. Well, okay. That conversation's over.
That's kind of what it was. That's
exactly we don't have anything we can discuss about that. Yeah. But we can certainly discuss the idea of a
food insecurity. Yeah. We can talk about food insecurity. We can talk about the fact that we're killing the soil and we may not be able to grow food in 60 years. Those are all conversations we have. Mm-hmm. But the Russia dropping the bomb tomorrow. Yeah. That's not what I'm willing to have.
We still need to discuss it.
And to be real and put this in perspective, I have removed exactly 3 posts in 5 years on that group.
Yeah, that's not terrible.
And that's just because they were far on the other side of extreme.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's how we got to, honestly, I think that's how we got to where we are now, because the division that we're facing right now is pretty extreme. And when you look at the fringe edges of it, which, I mean, when I'm on the radio at night, we talk about, the fringe edges of politics, and that, honestly, that's just making the divide worse. But if we focus on those small percentages of the population, they're the most extreme in whatever direction. uh, and we give them too much of a voice, we run into where we are now.
Let me
Yep.
ask you, Tom, do you really believe that it is a small population? Like, if everyone is moving toward this change, but the systems that are in place, or as Mark likes to say, the machine just runs itself, is able to push back on there, and there's so much resistance or hate or whatever you want to call it, is that not really how the country believes? I don't think we're there yet to the tipping point, if you will, where we're ready to move forward, where it really is just a few bad eggs or a few bad apples or a few extremists on the
So
far left or the far right.
Well,
statistics say,
I don't think we're there
and
yet.
I'm gonna jump in here because I do actually research this. Statistics is showing that the numbers of those people are getting smaller and smaller, and they are a minority.
yeah,
Um, and the
the
greater number are
trouble
moving.
is that I think the trouble is scope here, right? So when we're talking about minorities in the fringes of these very big picture ideas, even those minorities is a big number, in the tens of
Mhm.
thousands or more.
Yep.
But yeah, how
How
many
many
people are in
millions?
the United States now?
Millions.
370
320,
million or
300,
something?
320 million as of
Is it
last count.
320?
I think
Okay.
might be 322.
Yeah. So I mean, when we're talking about 300, let's just call it 320 for conversation's sake. I mean, if we're talking about 320 million and a small percentage on the left or the middle or the right, let's not worry about direction, just small fringe elements, that's still thousands of people.
But no,
Mhm.
it's not
That
small. It's 100 million people, right? It
it could
cannot
be.
it
It could be.
30% is 100 million, right? So it's a minority, but it's still a lot of folks.
It,
And those
it
folks
and a
tend to be
lot
in
of
power.
folks can make a lot of noise. So, but
I just don't think it's, tens of thousands of people when you're comparing the millions, right?
Yeah.
Because
right,
otherwise these things would have changed.
Well, and
maybe.
they are changing. It's just generational work. It's changing slowly. And so the question is, we're in a race, we're in a marathon. Are we going to get to the finish line before the finish line disappears?
I don't know, because it seems like we vote against our own interests, affordable housing, food for all. I mean, basic, you know, tenets of existing. We go against that for whatever the reasons are that are set in place, and that's difficult to comprehend.
One, all the problems that lead to this are all so complex, and there's so many different ways about going about it. That's further fuel for divisiveness. Let's fix it this way. No, let's fix it that way. Who's right?
I think that a lot of people are right, and the reason that we talk about the jigsaw puzzle when it comes to this project is we have to learn to embrace a lot of people's ideas. That doesn't mean
But
they're all going to be right, but
some of those ideas are directly contradictive.
well, yeah. So, but if we're all in the same room and we're all having the conversation about it, we can start seeing that that's the case and bringing together the ideas. I mean, it's collaborative. You bring it together, but we don't collaborate. We immediately conflict.
Yeah, that's human nature. It goes back
And
to those
I think
three
that we can.
F's.
I think that we can learn. I think that's human nature plus is where we're heading. Is we need to learn how to overcome that to some degree.
Yeah, well, we need to learn how to change it. Is what we need to do.
Yeah.
We need to make our nature one of like you've been talking about collaboration and cooperation and focus on the finish line.
Yep, and we have those parts. Those parts are part of our instincts too, because we did live in tribes. We do reach out for community. There's a drive in us to do that. But the other part is what has been messaged so heavily is to keep us in conflict and divided. And we have to, excuse the terminology, intentionally evolve beyond those messages.
Right, but
And that's a choice.
you've got to remember though that we started out tribal and we started out in communities, but those communities fought. They fought over resources. They enslaved each other. So we go back to that human nature of the
So
three F's.
Well, exactly, but also this is where and we can pick this up at another point, but this is where the story of Ishmael becomes very important because when
Mhm.
we stepped off of our evolutionary path onto the path that we're on, is when that started happening more and more.
Here's the problem, though. We never stepped off the evolutionary path. This is part of our evolution.
Well, we did. Okay, let's just say we did a major change in the way that we process things, and that brought us to a point of conflict
Yeah,
and assimilation.
yeah. But yeah, we're just as a modern species, we're just we haven't had enough time in this advanced state of civilization, let's call it,
Hmm.
to get over those survival instincts, and it's going to take
A while.
many
It's
more generations for that to go away, and we may not survive that transition.
exactly so, and so therefore we have to start making some choices now to start heading that direction, and some of us have to start pushing that pendulum the other direction some, and that's kind of what the Kitsap Resiliency Project is about. That's actually exactly what it's about. Anyway, we are at 1 hour and 2 minutes. Marwan and I can't ever seem to make it right on time.
Oh no, that's good. This is a very stimulating conversation. There definitely needs to be a part 2 to this, to
Okay, so
continue to unpack.
next week we're going to talk about the flip side of this record. We're going to be talking about hope,
Oh,
and then I think after that we can jump back into part 2 of the tools of culture.
hope is dangerous.
Mhm.
That's a dangerous conversation.
It's also a necessary one
Yeah, but
because hope will drive us farther than fear.
maybe, and it. Oh boy, yeah, I have a.
So,
Yeah, that's
well,
an interesting statement.
yeah. So I will leave it to Marwan, but I would like to invite you back for the conversation on hope next week.
No, I'd love to be part of it. Is same day, same time?
Same
Yep.
day, same time.
Oh no. It's an hour early because of Kitsap Housing and Homeless Coalition meeting.
Okay, so it'll be at noon next week. Okay.
Every third Wednesday, it's at noon, everyone. Programming note. We've been doing
Okay.
this for a while, so most of our audience knows, but for you new folks that are tuning in, every third Wednesday is at 12 p.m. So tune in.
Okay.
It's going to be a great conversation.
I hope so. Ha 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 ha.
All right. Hopefully, I don't have to censor you too much there. That's the mark button. All right, everyone. This was a great conversation. Always know that you can keep the conversation going in the chat. We will respond to it, but we will be back next week at 12 p.m. for Tipping Points and Puzzle Pieces. We want to go ahead and thank Tom for appearing with us today and giving his insight and thoughts and opinions on that conversation. So very important. Thank you so much for that. And in just about 56 minutes is our conversation with Kitsap Community Resources and Bremerton Housing Authority. And it's our deep dive. So usually we have Kirsten Jewell from the county come on. But as you, well, I'll let you know now, it's been out there. She is leaving the county housing division. And so Thursday is her last day. So this will be her last appearance on the conduit. So join us in 56 minutes for that conversation with Kirsten and the rest of the team. So look forward to it. For Tom, Mark, I am Marwan. This is Tipping Points and Puzzle Pieces. This is the conduit.